I get going? Thank you very much, Suzanne, and distinguished participants. Pleasure to be here to share a few thoughts on the topic of public-private partnership in agri-systems transformations. Let's see what the food system is. If you look at that, this is one of the biggest private sector activity perhaps. You have on the production side from farmers, seed industry, fertilizer industry, pesticide, and all these players on the production side. You have on the marketing side and the logistics, and then you have on the consumption side. We heard a lot in the morning about moving from food security to nutritional security. That's an important part of the game. We looked at malnutrition and obesity questions, but the innovations that are taking place in basic staples for the poor, whether it is rice or wheat, zinc-rich rice that is coming up, iron-rich pearl millets are coming up, but I don't know how many in the room have ever experienced blue or purple wheat or even black wheat. I have been a guinea pig. 5 to 10 times more antioxidants than the normal. All these things, new innovations in the products that we are producing with much richer nutritional content of it, they need to be sold as superfoods. And that is not the job of the government, it has to be the job of the private sector, branding it and putting it in the market. I have yet to see, it's in the labs, it is coming up at the farmer level, but still I'm looking at the whole value chain where it is not being. We haven't heard much about the marketing and logistics challenge, and that will be a critical one. We have been concentrating more on the production aspect, and in the wake of climate change, that is under threat. Let's see what happens. One more point that I need to flash here. We haven't talked about much of farmers' incomes. If we want to change their farming practices that are more climate resilient and nature friendly, even talking of removing subsidies is a non-starter. No farmer will accept that their income goes down. So if you can increase their income, and along with that, if you ask for better farming practices that are in tune with nature, then you have a chance to succeed. So this is critical, and I'll be talking a little bit on that front. It's not moving. Yeah. Now the food systems are under transformation, dramatic, because of population that is increasing. 2030 global population 8.5 billion, and by 2050 9.7 billion, and by 2100 it is likely to be about 11 billion. And I'll come back to that because that's putting all the pressure and degrading all the soil, water issues of greenhouse gas emissions. But we haven't talked about much in the morning on increasing urbanization. And we will see some slides. Much of Asia, bigger countries of Asia, already some countries, China, Indonesia, more than 50%, almost 60% of population is going in urban areas, and the food has to be transported. So a bigger and bigger role of the logistics and the marketing and storage activity needs to be kept in mind. Increasing fragmentation of land holdings, and that is, I'll come back to that slide because that's a challenge. And many people say what these small fragmented farmers can do in the world, whether they are just parking a lot of the poor or they can deliver food, and we'll come to that a bit. Extreme weather events, we know what is happening on the temperature, and as a result of that, I'll give you only one little example. Last year, India had El Nino, not a drought, just the El Nino effect for 3-4 weeks. There was a break in the monsoon season, and the agriculture growth dropped from 4.7% to 0.7%. So that can be a dramatic change just because of 2-3 weeks of break during the monsoon season as a result of El Nino. So this volatility is going to increase even more as the global warming picks up. And government alone cannot tackle all this. We have to join hands with the private sector where much of the resources are. I do want to bring on this table the first basic factor I talked about, the population. You look at, Homo sapiens, our tribe, 300,000 years to 200,000 years back, this is what the period was, and it took us more than 200,000 years to become 1 billion in 1804. 1 billion Homo sapiens, more than 200,000 years. The next billion was added in 123 years. And the next billion was only in 33 years, and then the next billion added in 14 years, and 13 years, and 11 years, and 12 years. So you look at what has happened in the last 200 years has never happened in the previous 200,000 years. The planet is the same, the land is the same, but population has exploded, and therefore the challenge and the pressure on the natural resources on it. Asia, which is the biggest part here, and you can see, is stabilizing in terms of population, and it will start actually declining. China will be the first one, and India, though still growing, but it will start stabilizing and coming down. I think the biggest challenge on this planet for food and nutritional security in the years to come will be in Africa, which is still growing population-wise much faster what India or China was growing perhaps in 1960s. This is what I was saying about the urbanization phenomenon that is coming up, and we will have to find new innovative solutions to produce food even in the urban areas with much higher capital, or transport all this from the rural areas and build all those value chains and supply chains to do that. Where Indonesia and China are today, more than 60% roughly of urban population, that's where much of the South Asia would be in the next 15 to 20 years, and therefore the biggest challenge that is going to happen. This is something amazing. The input industry is scaling up, the wholesale and logistics suppliers are scaling up, agro-processors are scaling up, retailers are scaling up, exporters, everybody is scaling up except the farming, which is still under pressure, except perhaps in China where the holding size has started increasing because people are leaving agriculture and going to urban areas, but still, what is their average holding size? Less than a hectare. And all other countries, the major countries of Asia Pacific, you will see India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they are still fragmenting, and the holding size is becoming smaller and smaller. And many a times we feel, what is it that these small farmers will do? I recall I was in Illinois on a farmer's field, and he was saying, oh, I'm a small holder, I have only 120 acres of land. And I said, do you know in India what is the average holding size? 1 hectare, that is 2.5 acres. And he said, how do they do farming? With kitchen knives and forks? I said, yes. And still they can feed 1.4 billion people. A point that I want to emphasize here on the smallholder question, which the president of IFAD mentioned. One example, India today is the largest producer of milk in the world, 230 million tons. The second largest producer of milk is US at 103 million tons. 230 and 103 million tons. In 1951, US was at 53 and India was at 17, 1/3. Today we are more than double, and it is all done by the smallholders. Average herd size is 4, less than 4. What I did not hear in the morning was we were talking about innovations in technology, new policies, but innovation in institutions. The milk revolution of India was not as much a technology. The technology was a simple lactometer to measure how much is the fat content. It was an institutional innovation, putting smallholders together and creating a stake. I think that is one of the ways to create an inclusive growth model. Otherwise, when we think about private sector, we think only of the big companies. How much inclusive that is and what share of that goes to the small farmers is a big question mark on that. So I do want to say here, smallholders can do, and they have done it. In fact, China is being fed, India is being fed by smallholders. 1.4 billion, 1.4 billion, Africa is another 1.4 billion. China has become a net importer of food, Africa is a net importer of food, but India is still a net exporter of food. And it is all the story of smallholders. So there is a possibility if we have the institutional mechanism to do it. In the World Economic Forum, the threats that were talked about, 1490 business leaders who were interviewed along with political leaders and academics, extreme weather events is the topmost threat and to food system. I was happy to hear that it's not that agriculture will be adversely impacted by climate change, but agriculture can also act as a carbon sink and therefore become a good source of income for the farmers, provided we have the institutional structure to do it, and that's a challenge. On the question of finance and the US to pay, we also need to know who are the biggest emitters and who are the actually countries that are suffering. All the red ones you can see in the Africa is going to be the worst victim of it for no fault of theirs. It's much of the emissions coming from top countries, China, USA, India, Russia, and Brazil. And I think there has to be a realization that there is a payback period to others who are suffering. On the PPP thing, one thing that I want to put on the table, there is no dearth of finance. You can unleash a whole system if you are smart in policy making. And some regulatory policies. In the Indian system, we had a policy that all the banks, whether private banks or public sector banks, 18% of their total credit has to be given to agriculture. Why can't we say that at least 10%, 15% of that has to go for climate smart agriculture? If we put that in place, all the finance constraints are likely to. This is the ESG framework. Europe has gone for that and putting a little pressure on many of the private players on that. So if you are smart in policy making, then you can raise a lot of finance from the banks or from the private sector, CSR activity. All this money can come in and put in the right. We know the technical solutions. It's not a brainer to think today you have the technologies to produce more with less. The precision farming is an answer to that. Technologies are there, but they are not scaling up. Some startups are there, few have scaled up a little bit, but many of the technologies we have been hearing for the last 20 years are not scaling up because the policy environment of today is still 40 years old, 50 years old. So it is not giving enough incentive to the new technologies and not rewarding those which can produce more with less. Can't get into each and every one, but all these things. We know protected cultivation, we know drip irrigation, we know vertical farming that's coming up. All these things are very much on the table, and only 10 days back I had a meeting where a young lady, 27 years old, compared to open field farming, if you switch to protected cultivation, can earn 10 times more, 10 times more. Productivity goes up 3 times more. With drip and other things, you can reduce the consumption of water, the fertilizer, the greenhouse gas emissions. All over Asia you would see rice, which is the prime crop, being cultivated through flood irrigation and creating methane. And if you apply fertilizer on that, granular urea, I know of my country in Punjab, the seat of Green Revolution, 250 kilograms of fertilizers. Plant is consuming only 35%, rest is going into the environment and nitrous oxide. And nitrous oxide is 273 times the carbon equivalence. And you are subsidizing that heavily, 75%, 80% subsidy on urea to create this type of poison. So the policies need to change. We will not subsidize soluble fertilizers which can be used in the fertigation, which can reduce all the methane emission, increase productivity, save water by 40%, but the policy doesn't subsidize that, it subsidizes. So there is a lot of role that policies need to fine-tune for the new climate concerns. These are some of the numbers from the research studies, what the benefits of micro-irrigation. But the issue is why in China it's only about 6-7 million hectares, so is in India micro-irrigation. Why not 50 million hectares coming up under that? Why we are still using flood irrigation? Agri R&D. We did speak in the morning that investment $1 billion in agri R&D can give you 5 to 10 times more returns than on subsidies. But in my country, we give fertilizer subsidy to the tune of $20 billion, but on agri R&D of the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, we don't give even $2 billion. And that's a major, and that's where the political economy works, that today I give you something free, you give me votes, and if you have to wait for some research, R&D. But private sector, the bigger players, global players, I have the data even up to 2021, but they said keep it in reserve because it's still not public material. 5 to 10% of their revenue, the big players from Bayer on, Bayer is spending 10% of its agri revenue on agri R&D, and others are also 5 to 10%, that's the range. Look at the countries, the public sector research, this is the ASTI data, it's 0.2%, 0.3%, 0.4% of agriculture GDP in the country. So I think public sector gives too much subsidies and too little on agri R&D, and there is a big message here. This is from food to nutritional security. All these things are already there in the system, but they need to be taken up by the private sector for propagating further into more nutritious foods. One thing that's not touched upon, you know, today in the urban areas, vehicular pollution is one of the things that the countries are trying to tackle. And they are going in a big way towards EVs, electric vehicles. Tomorrow you would see a similar movement in the rural areas of tractors and harvest combines moving in that direction. But if they start charging from electricity that is being produced by thermal, then there is no net gain. And rural areas are where all the land is available. At present there is a policy of solar parks to create solar energy, but why, and then there is a rooftop in most of the countries going up for that. Why not have on each farm, if you have spacing and 10 to 12 feet high, so that there is enough sunlight that will keep coming for photosynthesis of the crop. You can have assured irrigation, and this becomes your third crop. And this will give you income even if there is a drought. So this is the real crop insurance. Agrovoltaics as a third crop, but policy tweak is needed so that the state government or the company that is distributing electricity has to buy at a price negotiated upon. So this is a big scope for augmenting farmers' income, creating clean energy in the rural areas. And quite a few developments are taking place in agrovoltaics in developed countries, Germany, Japan, and all this. I think this is one potential where incomes of the smallholders, otherwise they are not able to feed their family with 1 acre. If you can put agrovoltaics along with the crops, then there is a much better chance for. Another thing, smallholders, seed is perfectly divisible, water can be divisible, fertilizers can be divisible, but farm machinery for a very small holder is a challenge. But the farm machinery services, if you can create Uberization of the farm machinery, and there are digital platforms to do that, I think that is picking up with some of the private companies. This is coming up as one of the solutions to cut down their costs and also looking at. The latest that's coming up are the drones for precision farming in a way, or sprays that are to be done. The Indian government is coming up with 15,000 women being trained as drone didis, which will be used. I think this is the women entrepreneurship along with the modern technologies. Last one little thing, because much of the methane, there are two culprits in a way in agriculture. One is the rice and the other is livestock, the antric fermentation that takes place. In a country like India, you cannot slaughter the cows because of religious reasons, and 50% are bulls, which are not needed anymore on the farms because of farm tractorization and all that farm machinery that is coming up. So they are sitting on the road. And this technology of sex-sorted semen technology, which the private sector is bringing in, I think can change the entire complexion of this within next 10, 15 years. And India is likely to be producing, not 230 million tons, but 400 million tons very soon. Last slide. If we have to find a solution to climate change, it's not only a question of adaptation and mitigation in agriculture. Much of this story is coming outside agriculture, and that is the energy part, and we have to tackle that. Thank you.